big interview, listeners. We have a treat today. 6 years we've been going, nearly 24 million listens, some sensational guests. And today we have another one because this is a man who lit up football pitches with ingenuity and wit and pace and skill, and is bringing those elements now to a coaching career at PSV Eindhoven. His name is Boudewijn Zenden, also known as Bolo. Boudewijn, welcome first of all to the big interview and thank you.
Thank you for having me.
We are only a couple of weeks past being in Zwolle with Jaap's time when we found out that Jaap's first name is not Jaap whatsoever. And I've never known, and I'm sorry to ask you something you've been asked a dozen times before, but where does Bolo come from, please?
It's a quick story short. My brother was into skateboarding, and they gave each other nicknames. As soon as I crossed the border, Boudewijn is a very difficult name to pronounce. So when we were on holidays, my brother said, "Why don't you call yourself differently, like as in Bolo?" So I did, but then I came back to PSV, and there was a certain player called Ronaldo who picked up the story, and from then on called me Bolo. So when I first entered the dressing room with PSV, from the youth academy up to the professionals, I started calling myself Bolo more as a nickname. But as I said, it stuck to me, and as soon as I crossed the border to play, for example, in Barcelona, I didn't even bother explaining my name. So it was Bolo, and it stayed all the way through my career. So there's a lot of people that actually only know me as Bolo and not even by my real name.
Let's pay respect to your judoka parents and then complete the circle by saying, what does Boudewijn mean, come from? It's a kind of beautiful name, and if names that are difficult to pronounce shouldn't be forgotten altogether.
No, it's difficult to pronounce, and back in the days you had the king of Belgium was called Boudewijn, and then in French it would probably be Boudewijn, and in Italian it would probably be Balduino. So the proper Dutch pronunciation is rather difficult. So as soon as you cross the borders, there's different ways to pronounce it, or at least for me, if your name is Boudewijn, then Balduino is not exactly the same. Boudewijn is nothing like Boudewijn. So then, especially on the pitch, Bolo works much better, much quicker.
It's nice to be talking to a man from Maastricht who's used the words crossing borders 2 or 3 times already, because Maastricht is where the treaty came from, and it's where Europe was at its most beautiful before the idiots in Britain spoiled it. You're sitting there with 2 stars on your training kit, because PSV, or PSV, I suppose it is in Dutch, I'm guessing, won the Europa League in the 70s, I think, but won the European Cup as well. You're talking to a man who loves the only club in Scotland with 2 stars, 2 UEFA stars, and it's neither of the ugly sisters. It's Aberdeen, who have many beautiful Dutch footballers, principally Theo Snelders and Theo ten Kat playing for us. When you come to a 2-star club, as you did, as a real youngster, and okay, you move into a squad where Ronaldo is a star, but there are hard-nosed, successful, demanding footballers around you. Wouters would be an example. When you come as a kid to PSV Eindhoven, what are the values that they tried to teach you? What was the experience, even before trying to force Hoekstra out of a place to be the wide man in that team? What's Eindhoven like?
Well, to be honest, Eindhoven itself, as a PSV as a club, is I think a warm club, a club which is a bit gives you the family feeling. You do have to perform, but that's not the only thing. You know, they do take care of you. It's not at times. Then for that reason, it's not very business-like. So they can give you a pat on the back instead of one up the back, but still you have to perform. But it's a bit of a cozy club where, for example, they try to organize stuff for the family. They try to take care of you, not just yourself, but also the family. It's let's say that they try to organize a get together for the wives. It's like they try to integrate everybody. And over the years, PSV has also always had a relationship with South Americans, and I think the South Americans in general are warm people. So they do well when they come to Eindhoven, because we try to offer them that warm feeling. But when I was a 17-year-old and I came first into the dressing room, it wasn't easy, of course, because being a youngster, you have to earn your stripes, not the stars, but the stripes. It was a transitional period where the club needed to get, I don't want to say get rid of, but they needed to clean up the dressing room a bit with the more experienced players, and freshen it up from the bottom with some youngsters, and that always brings a bit of friction within the squad. So I remember when first I joined, it wasn't that easy, but then I guess if you bring something to the table, then you're more likely to be accepted.
Growing up in Maastricht, how conscious were you of the European final in 1988? And some of our listeners will know it intimately, because we have really football fanatics following us and listening to us, and some won't, because we have younger listeners. But Van Breukelen, Gerrits, Nielsen, Koeman, Heinze, Soren Lerby, Van Aerle, Gerard Vandenberg, Linskens, Wim Kieft, Aberdeen legend Hans Hilhaus, coached by Hiddink, beating Benfica. Were you old enough to have been aware of that European final and what it meant for Dutch football?
Yeah, I think I was about 11 years old. So I was into the football, of course, and I was into PSV as well. I already had a bit of a fling with PSV at the time. I joined PSV when I was 13, actually. But when I was about 11, I started joining PSV on, for example, an international tournament, or I was invited to play a game with them, a friendly. So I was already, let's say at that time I was already a little bit on the radar. What also happened in that year, the 88, obviously the Dutch also won the European championship in Germany against the final was against Russia.
USSR, yeah, after quite an interesting semi-final against the old enemies, Germany.
Yes, of course. So I was aware of everything that happened there, and of course I know the actual path or the track that you have to make to get to the final is slightly different than these days. It's funny to see that, for example, also now we're actually at the moment in a phase of the season where with PSV we still play for 3 trophies, and we've already had 48 games, and there's still a possible 13 to play, minimum 10, and could be 13. So it's totally different than back in the 80s when a tournament like that was a little bit shorter than nowadays.
You came into a squad, and you won't find it difficult to anticipate. We're coming back to Ronaldo and Nazário, who the film company I work with. We produced a television series called El Presidente, following his rule at Valladolid, and we're a third of the way through a feature film with him. We're his partners. Our company is called Zoom. He's been so generous to us, and we're making a film with Ronaldo about the years 97-98 through the disastrous knee injuries to winning the World Cup in Japan. The first third of it is done, and it's fucking orgasmic. He's a marvellous man. But putting Ronaldo to one side for a second, when you're coming through into the team and breaking in, did I call it correctly that Hoekstra was one of the players you had to displace? Who helped you? Who was the cynical guy between Mitchell van der Gaag, Waterhuis, Stanley Waltz, famous, Newman, Meyer, and what kind of coach was Keith Schrijvers?
No, he. To be honest, Peter Hoekstra was not a cynical one, because he was actually, I think, 3 years older than me, and he was waiting to make the step into the first team as a regular starter. But then this younger kid came along and was aiming for the same position. So that was slightly different. To be honest, there was a moment where Ajax had a problem where Mark Overmars got injured and they needed a left winger, and they actually came to PSV to try and see if they could get me to move to Amsterdam. But the club wasn't willing to, and in the end Peter Hoekstra left for Amsterdam and I stayed. So you could see it both ways. Either PSV was probably more convinced maybe
in you,
and then in the other end they could still sell one of the other talents to Ajax, which wasn't obviously not a normal situation to buy a talent from one team to the other, especially PSV and Ajax, or either Feyenoord. So yeah, I don't say I burst onto the scene, but I did well in the youth leagues, and I was always scoring goals. And then I came to the first team, and I had to earn my way into the team, because in my first year, Ademos was the manager. He actually took me from the youth into the first team. Then after a few months, he got relieved of his duties. And then all of a sudden we had Kees Rijvers, who was only there for a short term, maybe 6 weeks, 8 weeks maximum, because Dick Advocaat was coming in January. And I think De Mos was left somewhere in November maybe. So they had to fill the gap up until Dick Advocaat came along. And Kees Rijvers was definitely a gentleman, someone from, I would call him at times maybe more a teacher type, someone who really was there to help you and
you smiled when you said his name. You smiled involuntarily.
Because for me he was maybe even like a granddad, you know what I mean? I was so young and he was already at a certain age, and it was just impossible to be angry at this man or whatever. He was so calm. I don't want to make the comparison because I think it's not right, but as a human, if I have to make a comparison on a human basis, maybe Bobby Robson had a bit similar. Like,
I understand what you mean. I understand. He naturally generates warmth and affection, even if he's tough and professional. There's an extra warmth around the person.
Yeah.
Look, Bolo, if I may, Bolo, strip away the ego and explain to our listeners, what did young Bolo Zenden bring to the challenge to be a first teamer, particularly under Advocaat at PSV? And within that, I want to understand how much not judo helped you, but also the judo philosophy, rather than the individual things. Particularly, almost all martial arts have a belief, have a teaching, have a philosophy that's far beyond what you do on the mat. And most of them are very one-on-one. And I'm intrigued as to whether you think I'm talking rubbish, or whether there's some fact in the one-on-one nature of, you didn't stay an out-and-out winger all your life, but being a wide left man is really what you're famous for. What did you bring to it, and how did judo help you?
Well, first of all, I think judo is a very complete sport, and I think it's a sport that all the kids should do as a way of development. I would suggest from the age of 4 up until 12. That's already a very big range where you could train your physique and your we say motoriek, like the way
your
of
motor
movement.
skills.
But I did it up until 16, 17. I got my black belt first dan. I did competitions. So besides all those things, you're entirely right to say that it's an individual sport. So if you lose, I mean, you're the one to blame. But also if you go on the tatami, which is where you compete, you cannot hide. I mean, it's just you. So you have to do it. You can't go. You can't step away from the one-on-one, the fight, the duel, and in the end, that's exactly the same. When I entered the pitch as a winger, I was in a battle with my fullback, and I wanted to beat him, and I wanted to lure him into a position where I could take profit from. But it also learned you to stay calm and don't react in an aggressive way, or let's say always react with your mind and not just with your heart.
Emotions.
Yeah, emotions. Put them aside and then make the right decisions. So that definitely helped me. Besides all other stuff that helps when you learn, for example, how to fall or break your fall, because sometimes people do get injured when they land inappropriate. Sometimes I still see it when a player gets tackled and he falls in a strange way. Someone who's done judo wouldn't fall that way. So I had a lot of profit from it, and it's definitely a sport that I would suggest for kids. Not just football, but any kind of sports that you want to do. It would be a good combination to do judo alongside it for a certain amount of time.
Does it frustrate you as well as seeing, let's say, a player fall awkwardly? The variety of things that could be, if not conquered, changed in a modern footballer. Had they had the discipline of not just judo, but martial arts across the board tend to teach philosophy, calm, restraint. You're trying to do something quite physical and it's often one-on-one, but there is definitely a teaching, an idea. And I'd argue that probably affects behaviour in lots of different ways rather than just the one-on-one of the football pitch. Does that frustrate you now, particularly as a coach?
No, I think it also gives you, there's a certain respect in judo. So the respect for the a teacher, of course, but also the respect for the levels of skills, because you have your belt, and you start with the white, the yellow, the orange, and so on. So it teaches you a lot of things, as in respect for yourself, for the opponent, and for maybe people in general. But nowadays, football is different. Society is different. I remember when I came on to the scene and I was in the dressing room with Hans from Breukelen, I shook his hand and I called him Sir and Mister. And he said, what are you doing? I said, well, yeah, it's still Mr. Van Breukelen. I mean, and he's actually in the board now here. So
he's one of your directors, right? Still to this day, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I still say this. And he says, yeah, you never changed. I said, yeah, why should I? Why should I? But yeah, now the kids, they come onto the scene and they think they're all chippy chappies and they've made it. And it's also a society where there's a lot of me, myself and I, it's all socials is about me. It's not about anybody. It's of course, I was a product, but I was, in the end, you were part of a team and you were part of a squad and you were one of many. But now a lot of times it's the individual within a team. So it's a totally different era than when I played. And I don't say it's wrong. I don't say it's right. I only say it's different. And as a manager, I think you have to deal much more with individuals nowadays than with a group. And of course, we also facilitate that, So we train players individually. We take them apart where we work only with the strikers or only with defenders. We give them everything is personalized. From their weight training to their food, So it's really everything is personalized. I'm sure that when you bought your first car, you could choose out of 2 colors. That was it. Now you can choose whatever. I mean, society is about choices. So that's the same now.
Our lovely sponsors have been with us for a long time, and Bet365 has sent us this question, asking us to ask you to describe your art. By which, let's separate the times when you played centrally and talk about Bolo Zenden, the winger. And the idea of something you touched on, that you called him, I loved it, my fullback. When you thought about, when I have the ball at my feet and I'm against my right back, how much distance did you want to have between you before you dropped a shoulder or sold him an idea that was false? Or what did you want to see in his balance, your balance? Take us into that little corridor of me v you.
there's obviously there's a lot of corridors in there, but in general, I of course I played especially in the beginning only as a left winger. Nowadays, even after that, I played in so many different positions. I was very versatile, which was a big advantage at times, and sometimes I think maybe it's not an advantage because you're better. Sometimes you're better, the best at something than good at everything. You know what I mean? So if a manager needs to make a choice, then he'll probably go for the best one in that position and not the one that can do the job as well. But to go back to that, I had a lot of pace. I was very pacey, and I knew it was a weapon that is hard to defend. So I had, especially at PSV, I had a very good understanding with the midfielder and so my left midfielder and my left back, which was actually Philippe Cocu and Archer Newman. And we had at times I call it a golden triangle, where you understand each other without talking. We knew exactly what we wanted to do. We knew exactly what was going to happen, and that way we were really tough to stop. Which means that I knew, for example, if Newman would play Cocu in, that he would play me first touch in the back of the defender. Or if Newman would take the ball from the centre back, have one touch, have a look at me, I would always make the counter movement where I would step into the ball, because a lot of defenders were really eager to put pressure on you. So I would make one step to the ball and then go deep, because I knew he was going to just chip it in behind, and it was a lift-off. I was gone, and they would never see me again. So that was definitely one of my strengths. So if you say, would you like to be close to your defender? Yes, I loved it when they were really eager to step on my toes, because then I knew it was slightly easier to lure into my counter movements, if you want to call it. And other than that, if you're a winger and you get the ball and you see the opportunity of a one-on-one, then you would never let it go. Because now sometimes I still train with the forwards here, and sometimes you see that a player gets a ball and he's stalling a bit and he's waiting, and then all of a sudden I see the centre back, covering, and then all of a sudden I also see a midfielder covering. I'm thinking, why would you wait? Why? You have a chance to go one-on-one, so just do it. This is your opportunity. If you're a winger and you don't want to go one-on-one, then you might as well just play somewhere else. The good thing, of course, is that you can make as many mistakes as you want, because the moment that you're successful, that's in the end what people will remember. Now, later on, when I also played as a defender, that was obviously the other way around.
No mistakes. I sat yesterday listening to a briefing. It wasn't a press conference, and so I used the words carefully, but Xavi Hernandez is the Barcelona manager, and Xavi took a group of 9 or 10 of us in, just off the record, to brief us about what he was trying to do. And in one of the sections, he said that he in teaching the players individually, he often marks them in one-on-one sessions. And he'll get Pedri, for example, in the midfield, and it'll be 90% is okay and 10% is KO. But with Ousmane Dembele, who resembles a little bit what you were talking about there as the wide man and when to go, and look at what he did in the Clásico when he took on Nacho and beat him and sent it for Aubameyang. He said, with Ousmane, it's not 90% KO, it's 90% chaos and 10% okay. But that 10% wins you the game, he said. Which corresponds with what you're saying about, like, wingers go into situations where they'll be robbed, where it won't work, and you must go again, and you must never lose the belief that you're doing the right thing and that you will beat your fullback. And then if the cross makes a goal, it's worth all the other problems and all the other times that the crowd goes, because once they'll go, yes. No?
Yeah, I obviously see where you're coming from, and it also reminds me of a moment where actually there at Barca, Rivaldo was playing as a winger, and he scored so many goals and so many assists, and when he won the Golden Ball, he said, I don't want to play in the wing no more, I want to play as a number 10. and that was when a little bit of trouble started with Van Gaal,
With Van Gaal.
at the time,
Yeah.
because Van Gaal said, now you look at it as a manager, and of course, as a fan, you'd say, okay, why would you put the best player in the world on the bench? You know, because then he said, okay, if you don't want to play, then come and sit next to me. He said, if I put him as a 10, he will score as many goals as a winger, but he'll also lose as many balls as a winger. And my team was in big trouble if I start losing the ball down the middle. So he said, for that reason, I think that he thought, okay, I do accept the collateral damage, but only but only on the side, not in the middle. And that also gives you a certain freedom on the side. So it's not like you can do everything wrong, and because nowadays I think also football has been has got much more complex, much more. You definitely need everybody to be on the same page, same level, in order to make certain things work.
I guess few people have ever compared Louis van Gaal and George Graham at Arsenal, but I'm about to, because George Graham's doctrine at Arsenal, when he was such a successful coach of a defensive team, he always told his fullbacks, show your wide man inside. And there were two reasons: show them inside, and it's more crowded there. There's more chance of a colleague helping you. But also, you show them inside and you rob them there. It's the same as your Van Gaal argument about, if we have the ball back there, this is a really good place where you have choices of how to punish the other side when they're a little bit ragged in their setup because they've lost the ball.
Yeah, but now we get into a different discussion, because back in the days, a left-footed player would play as a left wing and a right-footed on the right. Nowadays, the other way around, because they really want to go inside, and you see them either having a shot with, into the far post. Now a lot what you also see is, well, you've been there long enough. How many times did Messi cross the ball to the fullback Alba when he came in? The in-swinging cross. You see that so often now as well. It's a big weapon. It's a big danger. And of course, we just tapped on the goal that Aubameyang scored on the cross from Dembele, which was a little bit like a little bit old school.
Of course, it was old school. You go outside your man, you cross from the wide, and it's like
it's what 20 years ago.
It's a simple ABC. And nowadays it's all, coming back in, pulling it back and putting it over.
Well, blame Arjen Robben for that, because that was Arjen's fantastic trick. He was maybe the best there's been at that.
Yeah, he did. And he also developed something that made it even more difficult to defend. Because as I look at in detail, I don't know not sure if you understand what I mean, that you can get at someone straight and try to pass him in a straight line. So if the defender is in front of you, you're most likely to open up the angle. So you have to go further wide in order to stay away from the defender. What Robben did many times is even worse, where he created an angle where he actually went backwards. So the defender would never be able to get him, and then he would shoot, let's say, he would nearly shoot with his back against the goal. And that was even more difficult to defend. Instead of going forwards, he cut slightly backwards and then had a shot in the far corner.
But it's so difficult to defend, but technically still also more difficult for him to do it, which makes him so special.
It was more difficult.
It's clever because
He's buying himself a little bit more room, making it harder for his opponent, or even opponent coming towards him also. But fuck me, it's a message about how talented Robben was, I guess. You mentioned, listen, the beauty of a football discussion is why we exist, but time will chase us. So you mentioned Rivaldo and the extraordinary nature of his Ballon d'Or play. Let's not walk too far away from Ronaldo. The short spell that you had with this, I mean, one of the most beautiful footballers ever. Without the injuries, maybe people will be arguing he was the best footballer ever. He's certainly, to my taste, the best striker I've ever seen. The things he could do, but then you get near him, and he's an extraordinary person in almost every aspect. Just give us some insights as to your fun with that young guy in your training ground, your dressing room, and your team.
Well, I don't know where to start, and I don't know where to end, because you're fully spot on. So 2 different worlds, right? I'm coming from the youth, so I'm 17. I'm coming from the youth. I was just top scorer in the National League with Ajax and everybody, and I was moved up to the first team. Then there's this kid coming from the other side of the world. Well, not really, but you know what I mean. Comes from Brazil, where he just won the World Cup. He didn't feature, but it was 94. He won the World Cup. So he comes in and just lands in Eindhoven. Compare Eindhoven to Rio. I mean, it must have been a big shock. And he comes in and he has this massive smile on his face. Of course, didn't speak the language. But for me, his first game where he showed the class he's had was in a European game when we played Bayer Leverkusen.
The 5-4 game.
And he scored 3 goals. He just did basically everything on his own. It was like, okay, so this is really something special. So slowly he got into... I think even in one of the first interviews, the journalist asked, okay, so yeah, you're Ronaldo, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, you're striker, yeah. So how many goals are you going to score? And he said, yeah, 32. And they started laughing, and he was like, okay. He didn't understand why people were laughing. And then in the end, of course, he scored 33 goals or something, or 34. It was like goal scoring was natural to him. If you ask me, was he, if you compare 2 players, if you, Ronaldinho is a lot of, please don't take me wrong. It's a lot of circus, like a lot of trickery. But Ronaldo wasn't about the trickery. Ronaldo was more like 1-on-1, 2v1, 3v1. It didn't matter. He was so quick, agile, with the ball close to his feet. He had an acceleration. You think, okay, this would suit F1, he would. Besides that, a chance would be 99% goal. He would use his pace to run in behind the defenders. And besides that, he was so friendly. Such a nice guy. Of course, he didn't like the running. I mean, who does? But he wouldn't be... he was a guy that, even though maybe he did something wrong once, you wouldn't get mad at him because he wouldn't do it really on purpose, He was so friendly, generous. I stayed in a very small apartment. I rented it, but then I got a little bit of the possibility to buy an apartment. So I bought literally one bedroom apartment, but it was actually in the same building as Ronaldo. But of course, Ronaldo was in the penthouse. The elevator landed right in his living room. That was the big difference. So we spent a lot of time together. He's from the 22nd of September.
Yeah, you're only a month apart, right?
Yeah, we're a month apart. When he came, I had a little book called, let's call it Portuguese for Dummies. So I tried to communicate with him. I did go to Spanish lessons. So we were really close. We spent time together. As I said, we had lunch together. We stayed in the same building. But of course, he's from a totally different era. Funny thing is, I'm from Maastricht, and Maastricht is well known for carnival. So what do you think? Of course, I invited Ronaldo with his dad, I think, and he had a friend called Cesar. I took them to Maastricht for carnival. But of course, he's well known, so I'm thinking, okay, what am I going to do? He needs to get dressed up. So I got him a suit, like a clown, with a wig. and I painted his face. I think it was white, and then of course something with a red nose. But as soon as he smiled, everybody recognized him, of course, because it's such a big smile. And then he had the gap. He had the gap between his teeth. And then, but even then, still, he was so nice, generous. He's always in for an autograph or whatever. I thoroughly enjoyed playing alongside him, but also being around him, because, as I said, there was nothing that I could actually say negative about his personality. And for such a big player to be like he is or was, it's. I think it's really rare that that has happened. And also, he had these R9 shoes from Nike, and I also played on Nike. And then I think I was the only player who was allowed to play on his shoes because they were literally only for him. And I think on the World Cup or the Euros 2000 or the World Cup 98, I played on the similar shoes.
But also you played him in the semi-final. I was there that night, that roasting hot night with the 1-1 draw and the penalties. And
where we should have had a penalty, you mean?
I know you should. I was there. I saw it.
There's a VAR those days. Who knows?
And I don't suppose there was anything in you that night with that brutal disappointment that could say that night, I'm glad it's Ronaldo going forward. But little did you know that, one of the most extraordinary things in world football history was going to happen, whereby, as much as you deserved a penalty that night, and as much as the shootout could have gone the other way easily, who knows in a shootout, Brazil going forward, until that point, they'd played some pretty beautiful football, particularly against Denmark in Laudrup's last game in Nantes, and the 4-2 against Chile. It kind of looked as if Brazil maybe would add another title. France hadn't been that exciting, if you remember well, particularly 0-0 draw against Paraguay. And the night before, it's in the film that we know what he thinks happens. But he has whatever kind of fit he has. He doesn't get selected for the final. Then he does. Mundo's dropped again. Why him, man? Of all people to be left that night. Yeah. Which his timing wasn't right. He, the hangover of whatever happened to his physique and the fright that his mentality gave. I'm not sure he should have played, but it just felt like one of the saddest incidents in world football. That good luck to Zidane, good luck to France. It was an extraordinary.
Later on, I played with Marcel Desailly and Emmanuel Petit at Chelsea, and. Marcel also said, listen, we were really, I wouldn't say afraid, but we were worried to play the Dutch in the final. So when we got beat by Brazil, with all due respect, I think France was a little bit more relieved because we also played very nice football.
No, it was a beautiful team. So I wonder whether, I won't guide you, but our sponsors, Bet365, also asked us, goalkeeper, defender, midfield, attacker. You, Bolo, can only choose one for each position. Who are the best players in each position that you've played with, or maybe even your dream player? One goalkeeper, one defender, one midfielder, one attacker. I wonder if Presidente Nazário makes that four or not. You've got lots to choose from.
Yeah, there's too many to choose from. It's really hard. And sometimes when I have to make these lists, I would say, okay, I will only choose the Dutch because then, it minimizes the choices. But as a goalkeeper, I would then put in Edwin van der Sar. I think it's a logical choice. As a defender, I have to admit that the guy you visited in Zwolle is at his, of course, we talk about all the players in the prime. Jaapie was like a beast in the back. You wouldn't like to play against him. Jaapie actually came to PSV because our right back was injured. Now, he came to PSV from Willem II and started as a right back. So I had to play Jaapie. And thinking, here this tank comes along the line. And, you can try to stop it, but it just goes over you, you know. I'm thinking, I hope. So I really hoped at the time that the fullback that was injured got back sooner than later, so that then Jaapie would go back to the centre, because I didn't like to play against him. Then midfielder, it's well, let's say up front, it's obviously Ronaldo, and then I still have to choose one midfielder, and as I said, on the sides there have been so many good midfielders, but like in the middle, I found it hard. But there were three that I had to choose from, that I think that I have to choose from. That's Steven Gerrard. I'm almost going to say four now. You see, you make it too hard for me. You had Steven Gerrard,
apologize.
you had Frank Lampard, you had Xavi Alonso, and then you had Xavi Hernandez. Well, you choose one of the four, and I don't think you can make a mistake. If I want to play, obviously, on possession, then maybe Xavi Hernandez, but also Xavi Alonso would do the trick going forward. Steven Gerrard from the middle, bombing on, being there all the time. Lampard scoring the most goals ever in the Premier League as a midfielder. Well, do I really have to make choices out of these?
I'm in charge of the rules. All four of them are in. That's it. All four of them are in. Particularly seeing as you named Xavi Hernandez, who has superseded Johan Cruyff to be my favourite footballer of all time, including Messi. I don't care. Xavi is like, it's just, watching him was just pure joy.
But we go again, if you talk about personalities, he's also a lovely guy.
He's extraordinary. And also what I watch happening, and this is why it's a joy to speak to you, I love footballers, football people, sports people too, who couldn't just, because there are some people who can do it. There are some people who can do it and understand the strategy of why they're doing it, what they should do. And then there's a third category of those who can do it, who understand it, and who can communicate it and explain it too. And Xavi fits in that category. And I wouldn't care if it was Barcelona he was working for or Adelaide in Australia. I couldn't give a fuck. The truth is, this is a guy who's going to make football exciting, clearer, more enjoyable, and there's going to be lots of little Xavi disciples going out all around the world for the next 20 years, just like there were from Johan Cruyff, my favourite, the most important man there's ever been in the history of football for all that he brought to us. And it's like seeding something in a farm. If you seed it properly...
Say Cruyff did the same with Guardiola, and then Guardiola did again the same a bit with Xavi, and then it probably goes on. It's
for the good of our sport. Let me change the tack as we come into the last part of the interview. I'm interested about your work with Rafael Benítez, him coaching you when you had such bad luck, such tough times with injury, but him then recruiting you into a difficult situation at Chelsea where you combined and you won a trophy, a big trophy, with an extraordinary final against Benfica. I know that getting there is a long haul, and taking over in November in the middle of a season with a tough mentality squad. Why did you choose? And I know Rafa individually. I've interviewed him a dozen times. I've watched him closely, and there's no escaping the fact that he's extraordinary in his detail, in his understanding of how to train and coach and develop and the strategy for a game. He's very talented. There's also no hiding, and he doesn't hide from the fact that he's not an emotive guy. He's not a guy who builds a core of people around him and then keeps them forever, because there's a big turnover of people who move on. And he doesn't really need the player to be warm with him. And we've spoken about a lot of warm people in our conversation so far. So why Bolo and Rafa? Why does it work? And what did he ask of you when you joined his coaching setup?
Let's just take you how this all came along, because then it's probably easy to understand. I played under Rafa at Liverpool. He took me into the club. Yes, I had a bad spell where I had a cruciate ligament injury, which took me out. Normally cruciate is 9 months minimum. I did 5. I worked 6 days a week. I had 1 day off. It was a risk, but it was worth taking, I think. That was my first year when I got injured myself. I think it was against Seville in the Champions League. Then I already at the time had sometimes talks about it, being a coach, being a manager. He would stand next to me and he would ask me questions, about what do you see now, and then maybe I would say, well, players training or having a pass. I'd say, yeah, but what kind of groups do you see? You see, like it was more talking about the helicopter view. Then in the second year. I had another injury, of course, which didn't help with my exterior meniscus ligament. But I got back up, and I think for him I was more an international player, because I think I played every single game in Europe, and then I would do really well on a Wednesday, but then not play on a Saturday when we played Stoke, for example. So I guess that he had his players that he moved around. He had a solid, I would say, 5 players, and then the other 5 he would just rotate. So yes, at a time when he was the manager at let's say towards me, as you say, he was not really warm, not someone who. Makes I don't think he makes a friendship with the player, because he just makes decisions, and he wants to keep that friendship maybe aside. But then coming to the end, we had an honest talk about extending the contract, yes or not, because I signed a 2-year deal and I was running out, and we had a proper call it man-to-man discussion, and then he left it to me, and I decided then. I wasn't convinced that my best option was to stay, so I left for Marseille. But during the time that I was gone, we kept contact, because he definitely, how do you say this? He appreciated my opinion. He appreciated my professionalism. So if he was interested in a player, he would call me and would ask me, what does he like? How does he train? What does he do? So we kept this kind of relationship. And then obviously he got a possibility to be the manager, and he told me that if I was thinking of, if I was thinking of, would I be interested in being an assistant manager, and then I thought, okay. Also then it depended where it was and how it was gonna be like, and then it turned out to be Chelsea. For me, that was also like coming home. I still had my apartment in London. I knew obviously people at the club. I knew players at the club. And I think also, so Benítez, I think at the time was also interested obviously in me, because I had this relationship with Chelsea. And then I made a choice to join him for that year, and we, as you said, we entered when it was difficult, and in the end, I remember the last week of the season, we played semi-finals in the FA Cup against Manchester City. If we would have won it, we had a big problem, because it meant we had to play 4 games in the last week, and we also played then so we finished 3rd in the league, which was very important for the club, because the only thing they were interested in was actually finishing top 4 to be secured of Champions League football the next year. And we managed to win the Europa League in Amsterdam against Benfica, which by the way was probably one of our worst games, but we managed to win it. So in the end, yeah, we split our ways, and I moved back to Holland and did coaching courses with the federation and joined PSV reserve team as an assistant manager.
But I guess you have to be satisfied with that early, and I want to say thanks to James Fouracres, our socio, for posing that subject, to start so abruptly, to start in the middle of a season, even though you knew the club and you were liked and respected, coming into a dressing room like that with a manager like Rafa, with a dressing room that I'm not certain would have been completely sure about him. A club that he was very critical of when they were trying to lure Gerrard away. Coming in like that, staying third, going far in the FA Cup, winning a trophy, that needs to rank as, I imagine, as some satisfaction for you, because you know what you're doing now is more about a club with a structure, with support, using your talents in a longer way. That, it's just SAS, parachuted in. Every decision, every day, more or less has to be right.
Yeah, but I have to be honest. Of course, all the pressure was on Rafa. That wasn't on me. And I think all the criticism that was there was on Rafa. It wasn't on me. Of course, this was feeded by press because it was a story. Of course, as you said, Rafa had been... also me, when I played semi-finals with Liverpool against Chelsea, and we as Liverpool, we won on a penalty shootout, and it took us to the Champions League final against AC Milan. Maybe back in the days there wasn't a rivalry, but certainly just before that there was a lot, because it was nearly year after year that in either the FA Cup or in the Europe, the path of the two clubs crossed, and that always brings a certain rivalry becomes bigger. So then for Rafa to make this step was always going to be a difficult one. And by the way, we also lost the final of the World Cup against the Corinthians, 1-0. So all in all, it definitely wasn't an easy season, to say the least. But I also think when Chelsea signed Rafa, the immediate tag that was put on was interim. And for me, that's always difficult, because when you get a stamp, a tampon, or how you call it, as an interim, then basically you're already lost, because everybody knows it's temporary and someone else will come in and take over. So I don't think that makes it easy for any manager to step into a job.
This is my argument about what an achievement it was. So look, we're going to close now because I'm respectful and I'm not going to push for time. But first of all, good luck with... We didn't get the chance to talk about that extraordinary title you won with PSV, fighting off Feyenoord, and the two matches, the 7-2 and the 0-0. We didn't get that chance. Maybe that's for another day. Good luck with PSV for the moment. Goodbye, Schmidt, in due course. Welcome, Van Nistelrooy. Good luck with the development of Gakpo. But if you'll allow me, I'm going to close with one of our socios sent in this question, Shane Hurley. And Shane says, this is specifically for Bolo, a league winner with PSV and Barca, cups with Chelsea, Borough, the man who won the only cup in that history. You can tell us about the pressure of the penalty if you want, man of the match. But Shane says, cups with Chelsea, Borough and Liverpool, some very demanding fan bases. Where did you feel the most pressure to achieve silverware, and which of all your titles, and we've forgotten Young Player of the Year in Holland in 97, which of all your titles brought you the most joy?
There's a lot of questions in this question. Well, if you have to put everything together in one place, I think Barca was the most demanding. Why? I guess it's because just winning isn't enough. It has to be good, with good football. You cannot win a trophy with bad football. A draw is like a loss. I remember that I came from Barca to Chelsea, and our first home game we drew against Newcastle United, and I had to walk from the stadium to the car park, and I was thinking, okay, how am I gonna do this? Because we just drew. And then I met people and I said, okay, well done. Maybe it helped that I scored the only goal, but they said, oh, well done, no worries, son, we'll get him next week. I'm thinking, okay, well, this wouldn't, I mean, imagine drawing the opening game of the season with Barca. So yeah, for demanding trophies, I think Barca. Of course, I've been with Barca when I think we were second in the league, semi-finals in Europe, semi-finals in the cup, and it was enough to sack the manager. So I think that comes with the club. And then trophies, yeah. What? How can you choose between your children? Yes, I mean, come on. A trophy's is a trophy. You enjoy all of them, and also some didn't go down well. So, for example, if you talk about a semi-final in the European Championships, or a semi-final in the World Cup, or even losing a Champions League final, all these experiences are extraordinary. It's not for everybody, but of course, maybe for the club itself, to win the League Cup with Middlesbrough, where they never won anything. I remember they lost 4 finals. This was the 5th final that they were going to play. I remember going onto the pitch in Cardiff because Wembley was being refurbished. 76,000 people. And I remember going onto the pitch with, of course, Gareth Southgate as our captain, the England manager now. And I said to all the guys, I said, listen, this is the moment. This is the moment to write history for us, for the club, for everybody. Because, I mean, that as a player, the opportunity to actually win something is not always there. Even worse, you must be really privileged to get the opportunity to win a trophy. And a final, there's only one way in a final, and it is to win it. And in the end, I think we won the League Cup, and it was the first trophy in 125 years. And maybe now it's 145 years. I don't know how long it exactly was ago. But that was special because we had a good group of players. We really gelled well together. We would go out on the field as friends. We would do stuff together. It was it was just a special day. And a special trophy. And of course, I would also say winning the league in Barcelona in '99 is special because winning a cup is special, but that's also a shorter has a shorter track to it. Whereas if you win the league, it's 38 games where you have to be the best. So that's also special.
Particularly in their centenary season. No, I loved the way you became Meryl Streep in Sophie's Choice there, and don't make me choose between my children. It was a good reference. Boudewijn Zenden, I hope I've done my best there for the correct Dutch pronunciation. You'll have heard this 1,000 times before, but it's from the heart, from all of us. This has been a privilege. It's been huge fun. You bring an awful lot to football beyond what you coach and how you played. It's a pleasure to speak to somebody so interesting and colourful and articulate. It makes our life fun. Thank you from all of us very much for the generosity you've shown us. And PSV for the title.